Sometimes the biggest mistake is believing you already know the whole story. The afternoon traffic rolled steadily through downtown Washington, District of Columbia, as commuters hurried between office buildings beneath a clear spring sky. Construction cones lined one side of the avenue where crews had temporarily narrowed the roadway, and electronic message boards flashed updated traffic information to drivers passing through the busy corridor. Near the edge of the restricted zone, a dark government sedan sat legally parked beside a row of utility vehicles, its dashboard holding several neatly organized folders and a city map marked with handwritten notes. Standing beside the vehicle was Maya Brooks, a 36-year-old transportation professional dressed in a navy blazer, charcoal slacks, and practical walking shoes. A reflective safety vest rested neatly over one arm, while she quietly studied pavement markings, temporary signs, and traffic signal timing with careful attention. To anyone passing by, she appeared to be another government employee completing an ordinary inspection. She carried no air of importance, spoke to no one, and simply wrote observations into a small notebook every few moments. Across the street, several contractors exchanged uneasy glances before returning to their work. One quietly checked his phone, another glanced toward the construction supervisor, and a third subtly repositioned a temporary warning sign by only a few inches. Maya noticed every movement without reacting. She had spent years learning that the smallest details often revealed the biggest problems. Moments later, the familiar sound of a patrol vehicle echoed down the block. Officer Brandon Hale stepped from his cruiser and scanned the work zone with practiced confidence. He noticed the parked sedan almost immediately. Without knowing why it was there, he assumed it had been left inside a restricted area without authorization. Clipboard in hand, Maya continued reviewing the traffic layout as Hale approached. "Ma'am," he called in a firm but professional tone, "this vehicle cannot remain here. It will need to be moved." Maya looked up calmly. "Good afternoon, officer. This vehicle is here for official work." Hale glanced briefly at the sedan before returning his attention to her. "Do you have documentation authorizing it to remain inside this zone?" Maya nodded slightly. "Yes, I do." Before she reached for anything, Hale raised a hand. "Please leave your bag where it is for the moment." Nearby pedestrians slowed their pace, sensing an unusual conversation unfolding beside the construction barriers. Workers stopped long enough to watch from a distance before pretending to return to their tasks. Maya remained composed. "Officer," she said evenly, "I am conducting an inspection that needs to be completed before traffic patterns change this evening." Hale looked toward the temporary signs and then back at the sedan. "That may be," he replied, "but I still need to verify why this vehicle is parked here." Maya closed her notebook without argument. "I understand." The wind gently lifted a loose page on her clipboard before she secured it beneath a metal clip. At the same time, her government-issued phone vibrated once inside her jacket pocket with a silent notification she chose not to check. Instead, she quietly observed the work zone, the contractors, and the officer standing before her, as though each was an important part of the same unfinished picture. Neither of them realized that within the next few minutes, the purpose of that parked sedan would become the least surprising part of the entire afternoon. Maya Brooks calmly adjusted the stack of inspection documents resting on the hood of the government sedan while the afternoon breeze carried the distant sounds of traffic through the construction corridor. Around her, orange safety barrels stretched for nearly 2 city blocks. Temporary lane markings guided vehicles through narrowed lanes, and electronic message boards displayed reduced speed limits for drivers entering the work zone. She had reviewed dozens of transportation projects over the years, and she had learned that the smallest irregularity often pointed toward a much larger problem. Officer Brandon Hale stepped closer to the vehicle, studying the official license plate before looking back at Maya. "I still need to verify whether this vehicle is authorized to remain here," he said in a firm voice. Maya nodded politely. "I understand your responsibility, officer. I only ask that you allow me to complete one time-sensitive observation before anything changes in this work zone." Hale folded his arms. "That depends on what you are doing here." Maya glanced toward a newly installed traffic sign standing 20 yards away. Its placement seemed ordinary to everyone else walking past, but she continued watching it with unusual concentration. A contractor noticed her attention and immediately turned away, pretending to organize equipment near a utility truck. Another worker quietly whispered something into a handheld radio before resuming his task. None of those small movements escaped Maya's notice. She simply wrote another brief line inside her notebook. "You have been taking notes for quite a while," Hale observed. "What exactly are you documenting?" "Traffic control devices," Maya answered. "Temporary lane alignment. Signal timing. Equipment placement." Hale looked toward the roadway. "That seems like a lot of detail." "Public safety depends on details," Maya replied. Nearby, several pedestrians slowed to watch the conversation. One delivery driver paused with a rolling cart, curious about the government sedan and the growing attention surrounding it. A city bus passed slowly through the construction lane, its driver carefully following the temporary traffic pattern before disappearing around the next intersection. Maya quietly checked the reflection of the signal lights in a nearby storefront window rather than staring directly at the intersection itself. Officer Hale noticed the unusual habit. "Why are you looking at the reflection instead of the signal?" Maya smiled faintly. "Sometimes you notice changes more easily from another angle." The answer only deepened his curiosity. He walked around the sedan, carefully examining the windshield permit displayed near the dashboard. It carried an official government seal, but he could not immediately identify the issuing agency from where he stood. "Do you mind if I verify this permit?" he asked. "Not at all," Maya replied. "Everything on this vehicle has been properly documented." As Hale leaned slightly closer to inspect the permit, Maya's government phone vibrated again inside her jacket. She ignored it without even glancing down. Whatever message had arrived could wait. Timing mattered more than convenience. Across the street, one contractor quietly began loading several orange signs into the back of a truck even though the workday was far from over. Another looked repeatedly toward the corner as though expecting someone to arrive. Maya watched those subtle changes without saying a word. She had seen this pattern before. People often became restless just before the truth reached them. Officer Hale straightened and looked directly at her once more. "Until I receive confirmation, I cannot guarantee this vehicle will remain here." Maya met his eyes with the same calm expression she had maintained since the beginning of the conversation. "Officer," she said quietly, "before today ends, you will understand why moving this car is the least important decision standing on this street." Maya Brooks remained beside the government sedan with the same measured composure she had shown since the patrol car first arrived. The construction zone continued operating around them as if nothing unusual had happened, yet the atmosphere had quietly changed. Workers who had once moved confidently now seemed distracted, checking their surroundings more often than their equipment. Officer Brandon Hale noticed the shift as well. Years of patrol experience had taught him that when several unrelated people suddenly became uneasy at the same time, there was usually a reason worth understanding. He looked once more at the temporary lane closure stretching toward the next intersection. Fresh pavement markings appeared perfectly straight from where he stood, but Maya continued studying them with unusual focus. "You have been watching that section of the road for several minutes," Hale said. "Is there something wrong with it?" Maya answered carefully. "I am still collecting information." "About the pavement?" he asked. "About everything connected to it," she replied. The answer sounded simple, but it carried enough confidence to make Hale pause before asking another question. Nearby, a construction supervisor walked toward a pickup truck, opened the driver's door, looked inside for only a moment, then closed it again without removing anything. Another employee quietly adjusted a portable traffic sign even though it had already been positioned correctly. Maya wrote another brief note in her notebook. She never commented on what she observed. She simply documented each small detail with exact times beside every entry. A delivery van rolled slowly through the work zone, following the temporary traffic pattern exactly as directed. Maya watched the vehicle pass beneath a portable signal before briefly checking her wristwatch. "You seem to know precisely what you are waiting for," Hale observed. "Timing matters," Maya replied. "Some things cannot be evaluated until traffic flows naturally." He glanced toward the government sedan again. "Does your office always conduct inspections this way?" Maya smiled politely. "The safest conclusions usually come from patient observation instead of quick assumptions." Those words lingered in Hale's mind longer than he expected. Around them, afternoon traffic continued moving steadily, and the sounds of engines, construction equipment, and distant conversations blended into the familiar rhythm of a busy Washington street. Then Maya's phone vibrated once more. This time she quietly looked at the screen for only a second before placing it back into her pocket. She did not make a call. She did not send a reply. Whatever message she received seemed only to confirm something she had already expected. Across the street, a dark government sport utility vehicle turned onto the avenue before disappearing briefly behind a city bus. Hale noticed it but thought little of it. Government vehicles were common in this part of the city. Maya, however, followed its movement only through the reflection in a nearby office window instead of turning directly toward it. "You keep looking at reflections?" Hale said. "Old habit." "Professional habit," Maya answered. "Sometimes the clearest picture appears where people are not expecting you to look." The construction supervisor checked his watch for the third time in less than 2 minutes. One worker quietly gathered several inspection folders from a table beside the trailer. Another looked toward the approaching intersection with growing concern. Hale slowly realized that everyone except him seemed to be waiting for something. He looked back at Maya. "Is someone coming?" Maya closed her notebook with calm certainty and met his eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "And when they arrive, this street will finally begin telling the truth." The afternoon sun drifted lower over the buildings as long shadows stretched across the construction zone, giving every traffic cone and temporary barrier a sharper outline. Maya Brooks slipped her notebook into her shoulder bag and quietly reviewed the intersection one final time before looking back toward Officer Brandon Hale. Around them, engines idled, workers adjusted equipment, and commuters continued through the narrowed lanes without realizing that several people standing nearby were watching the same intersection for entirely different reasons. Hale followed Maya's line of sight toward the portable traffic signal. Everything appeared ordinary. Vehicles stopped when the light turned red, then moved forward when it shifted to green. Yet Maya's attention remained fixed on the timing rather than the traffic itself. "You keep looking at that signal," Hale said. "Is it malfunctioning?" Maya answered calmly, not in a way most drivers would notice. Before Hale could ask another question, the construction supervisor hurried toward the project trailer, spoke briefly with another employee, and immediately returned carrying a stack of inspection binders. Neither man opened them. They simply stood beside the trailer, glancing toward the street every few seconds. Hale noticed their behavior and frowned. "They seem nervous," he said. Maya nodded slightly. People often become uncomfortable when records are about to be reviewed. A light breeze carried the sound of approaching vehicles from the next block. One dark government sport utility vehicle appeared first, followed by another several car lengths behind. Both moved slowly through traffic without emergency lights or unnecessary attention. Most pedestrians paid them no mind. To Maya, their arrival fit perfectly within the schedule she had been expecting since early that morning. She quietly checked her watch once more. "Right on time," she whispered almost to herself. Hale heard her. "You knew they were coming." "I knew someone would arrive," Maya replied. The exact moment depended on the traffic flow. The answer puzzled him even more. Across the work zone, one contractor subtly stepped away from a temporary storage container and made a brief phone call before placing the device back into his pocket. Another worker removed a reflective vest and folded it neatly over a barricade, though the shift had not ended. Maya observed every movement without making a single comment. Her silence seemed deliberate, as though she understood that the truth often revealed itself more clearly when people believed no one was paying attention. The lead government vehicle slowed beside the intersection before coming to a smooth stop near the construction barriers. Two professionally dressed officials stepped out carrying document cases rather than toolboxes. Their expressions were calm, focused, and familiar with exactly where they were supposed to be. Hale instinctively straightened his posture as they approached. One of the officials briefly surveyed the roadway before looking directly toward Maya. He offered a respectful nod, the kind exchange between colleagues who had already completed months of preparation before meeting in public. Maya returned the gesture with quiet confidence. The construction supervisor lowered his eyes. Several workers stopped talking altogether. Even the steady rhythm of the job site seemed to pause for a moment. Hale looked from the arriving officials to Maya, then back toward the government sedan that had started the entire conversation. He realized that everyone except him had expected this meeting. Whatever was about to happen next had been carefully planned long before his patrol vehicle ever turned onto that street. The lead official approached with unhurried confidence, carrying a slim document case instead of rushing into the work zone. Every movement reflected careful preparation rather than urgency. Officer Brandon Hale instinctively stepped aside to allow the visitors through, his attention shifting from the parked government sedan to the newcomers who seemed completely familiar with the scene unfolding before them. Maya Brooks remained exactly where she had been standing, her notebook resting quietly beneath one arm, as if the last hour had unfolded precisely according to schedule. The senior official offered a polite smile. "Good afternoon," he said before turning toward Maya. "Thank you for maintaining the observation timeline." She returned the greeting with a simple nod. Traffic patterns remained consistent after 2:15. The temporary signal sequence also remained unchanged. The official acknowledged her report without surprise, then accepted the notebook she handed to him. Officer Hale watched the exchange carefully. There was no confusion between them, no introductions, no need to explain why Maya had been standing beside the roadway documenting details that everyone else had overlooked. They spoke like experienced colleagues continuing a conversation that had begun long before anyone else arrived. Nearby, the construction supervisor quietly removed his hard hat and waited without speaking. Several workers gathered near the project trailer, their earlier confidence replaced by quiet uncertainty. The senior official opened Maya's notebook and compared her handwritten observations with several printed inspection sheets inside his document case. Every timestamp matched. Every lane adjustment had been recorded. Every temporary sign relocation appeared exactly where Maya had documented it. "Excellent consistency," he said. "That completes the field verification." Hale looked toward Maya. "You have been documenting this project all afternoon." "Longer than this afternoon," she answered calmly. "Today was simply the scheduled field review." Another government vehicle arrived carrying additional personnel equipped with measuring devices, cameras, and sealed storage cases for official records. They spread through the construction area with quiet professionalism, photographing traffic control equipment, checking pavement markings, and reviewing permit numbers attached to temporary signs. No one hurried. No one raised a voice. The work resembled a carefully rehearsed inspection rather than an unexpected intervention. Hale noticed one inspector examining the portable traffic signal that Maya had watched for nearly an hour. Another carefully measured the distance between warning signs and lane markings. The details that had seemed ordinary at first suddenly appeared much more significant. Maya observed the inspection without interfering. She simply answered occasional questions, pointed toward specific locations, and allowed the specialists to complete their assignments. The construction supervisor finally approached the senior official with several binders containing project documentation. The official accepted them politely and placed each binder into a labeled evidence container for administrative review. Hale quietly realized that the conversation about moving one parked sedan had become almost irrelevant. The focus had never truly been the vehicle. It had always been the roadway surrounding it. Maya looked once more toward the intersection where traffic continued flowing smoothly through the temporary lanes. "When infrastructure works properly," she said softly, "most people never notice it. That is exactly how it should be." Hale followed her gaze. For the first time since arriving, he stopped looking at the parked car and began looking at the entire project instead. The afternoon suddenly seemed much larger than one routine service call, and he understood that the answers he had been searching for were never inside the vehicle. They had been written across the street all along. The final inspection team spread methodically across the work zone, each specialist moving toward a different section of the temporary traffic layout with clipboards, measuring wheels, digital cameras, and sealed document cases. Their work unfolded with remarkable precision, transforming what had appeared to be an ordinary construction project into a carefully documented federal review. Maya Brooks remained near the government sedan, answering questions only when necessary and allowing the inspectors to complete their assignments without interruption. Officer Brandon Hale watched the process unfold with growing curiosity. Every few minutes, another inspector compared field measurements against official project drawings, while others photographed temporary lane markings and verified permit numbers attached to portable traffic control equipment. Nothing about the operation resembled an emergency. It resembled preparation, patience, and years of professional experience coming together in a single afternoon. The senior official closed Maya's notebook after comparing every recorded observation with the inspection schedule. "Director Brooks," he said clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "your field review is complete. The documentation is consistent with the Federal Transportation Compliance Plan." For the first time since the afternoon began, Hale fully understood who had been standing beside the sedan all along. Maya was not simply another government employee reviewing paperwork. She was the federal transportation official responsible for overseeing the inspection itself. The realization settled quietly over the entire work site. Several contractors exchanged uncertain glances while the construction supervisor lowered his eyes, realizing the importance of the review that had been taking place in plain sight. Hale looked toward Maya with genuine surprise. "You were leading the inspection from the beginning," he said. Maya nodded gently. "The safest way to understand a project is to observe it before people know they are being evaluated." The senior official continued reviewing the collected records before placing them into a secured evidence container for administrative processing. "These findings will now move through the standard federal review process," he explained. "Every document, measurement, and observation will be evaluated before any final decisions are made." Around them, traffic continued flowing through the temporary lanes exactly as it had all afternoon. Drivers remained unaware that the roadway beside them had just undergone one of its most thorough inspections. Maya looked across the intersection where workers had begun restoring equipment to its proper locations after the measurements were complete. "Most people will never know this inspection happened," she said quietly. "If the roads become safer because of it, that is exactly the outcome we hope for." Hale reflected on the conversation that had begun with a simple question about a parked vehicle. What had seemed like a routine enforcement matter had slowly revealed an entirely different purpose. He realized that the parked sedan had never been the story. It had simply been one small piece of a much larger responsibility dedicated to protecting the millions of people who depended on safe highways every day. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the freshly painted lane markings as the inspection team prepared to depart. Maya gathered her notebook, secured her documents inside the sedan, and took one final look at the completed work zone. Everything she needed had been recorded. Everything important had been preserved. As the federal vehicles quietly pulled away from the curb, the construction site gradually returned to its normal rhythm, but for Officer Hale the street no longer looked ordinary. It had become a reminder that careful observation, patience, and respect for facts often reveal truths that first impressions never can. The federal vehicles disappeared into the afternoon traffic, leaving behind a work zone that looked almost identical to the one that had existed only an hour earlier. Orange barrels still guided drivers through narrowed lanes, temporary signs remained firmly in place, and the steady rhythm of passing vehicles continued without interruption. Yet for the people who had witnessed the inspection, nothing felt quite the same. Officer Brandon Hale remained beside his patrol vehicle, watching as Maya Brooks carefully organized her notebook, secured the remaining project files inside the government sedan, and completed one final review of the intersection. She moved without celebration or urgency. To her, the successful conclusion of an inspection was simply another responsibility fulfilled. Hale walked toward her, his posture noticeably different from when the afternoon had begun. His questions no longer carried certainty. They carried reflection. "Director Brooks," he said, "I have been thinking about everything that happened today." Maya closed the trunk of the sedan and turned toward him with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the inspection. "What have you concluded?" she asked. Hale looked briefly across the roadway where traffic flowed smoothly through the temporary lanes. "I realized that I focused on one vehicle when I should have been looking at the entire situation. I was trying to solve the wrong problem." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "That happens more often than people realize. Context changes everything." A light breeze moved through the construction zone as several remaining workers loaded equipment into utility trucks. The temporary inspection signs were removed one by one, and the work site slowly returned to its ordinary appearance. Hale watched the crews finish their tasks before speaking again. "You never seemed frustrated," he said, "even when I questioned why your vehicle was here." Maya smiled gently. "Professional responsibility requires patience. If every misunderstanding became an argument, Very little important work would ever be completed. Those words lingered in the quiet space between them. Hale understood that she had spent the entire afternoon protecting the integrity of the inspection rather than protecting her own pride. That realization impressed him more than any title or official credential could have. The senior federal official approached, carrying the secured document case. "Director Brooks," he said, "the review team has everything needed for the next phase. Headquarters will receive the complete field package before the end of the day." Maya acknowledged him with a simple nod. "Excellent. Safe travels." The official departed without further discussion, leaving Hale and Maya standing beside the now quiet roadway. "May I ask you one final question?" Hale said. "Of course," Maya replied. "How did you remain so certain that everything would work out?" Maya looked toward the freshly painted lane markings reflecting in the late afternoon sunlight. "Because facts do not become less true simply because they take time to appear. My job is to gather them carefully, protect them, and allow them to speak when the time is right." Hale considered her answer for several moments before extending his hand. "Thank you for your patience today." Maya accepted the gesture with quiet professionalism. "Every public servant has the same goal," she said. "When we listen carefully, ask better questions, and respect the facts before reaching conclusions, the people we serve benefit from better decisions." As Maya entered the government sedan and drove away from the intersection, Hale remained standing beside his patrol vehicle for another moment, watching the evening traffic move safely through the corridor that had been the focus of so much careful attention. The roadway looked ordinary once again, but he knew he would never view an ordinary scene quite the same way again. Several weeks passed before the federal review reached its conclusion, but for the people who had worked along that construction corridor, the memory of that quiet afternoon remained surprisingly vivid. The roadway itself looked completely different now. Fresh pavement stretched smoothly across every lane. Permanent traffic signs had replaced temporary ones. New lane markings reflected brightly beneath the morning sun, and the intersection operated with a level of precision that drivers would never notice precisely because everything worked as it should. Maya Brooks returned to the site for one final follow-up visit shortly after sunrise. Unlike the previous inspection, there were no construction vehicles crowding the curb, no temporary barriers, and no gathering of concerned supervisors. The project had become another ordinary part of the city, blending naturally into the daily routine of thousands of commuters. She parked the same government sedan in a designated inspection space, stepped onto the sidewalk with her notebook, and quietly observed the morning traffic for several minutes. Every signal cycle matched the updated timing plan. Every directional sign stood exactly where it belonged. Every lane transition guided drivers safely through the intersection. She closed her notebook with quiet satisfaction. Not because the work was perfect, but because the improvements would quietly protect countless people she would never meet. As Maya prepared to return to her vehicle, Officer Brandon Hale arrived in his patrol car during a routine morning patrol. This time, there was no uncertainty in his expression and no misunderstanding about why the government sedan was there. He parked nearby, stepped out, and greeted her with a respectful smile. "Good morning, Director Brooks," he said. "Looks like the project turned out well." Maya glanced toward the steady stream of commuters passing through the intersection. "It did," she replied. "Most people will never realize how many small corrections were made here. That is usually the best outcome." Hale nodded thoughtfully. "I drove through this intersection several times over the past few weeks. Traffic moves more smoothly now than it did before." Maya smiled gently. Infrastructure succeeds when people stop thinking about it. Safe roads rarely make headlines. The two stood quietly for a moment, watching school buses, delivery trucks, cyclists, and families begin another ordinary day. Every vehicle passed through the improved corridor without hesitation, never knowing how many careful observations, measurements, and patient decisions had contributed to those few effortless seconds. Hale looked across the roadway before speaking again. "That afternoon changed the way I approach every service call," he admitted. "I still respond quickly, but I spend more time understanding the situation before reaching conclusions." Maya appreciated the honesty behind his words. "Experience teaches procedures," she said. "Reflection teaches judgment. The strongest public service comes from using both together." Nearby, a city maintenance crew inspected newly planted trees along the sidewalk, while a crossing guard welcomed children on their way to school. The neighborhood felt calm, organized, and ordinary. Yet Maya understood that ordinary moments were often built upon countless unseen decisions made by people committed to doing careful work. She placed her notebook inside the sedan, took one final look at the completed intersection, and quietly drove away toward her next assignment. Another roadway awaited inspection, another community depended upon safe transportation, and another ordinary morning held details that deserved careful attention. Behind her, Officer Hale resumed his patrol, carrying with him a lesson that no training manual alone could have provided. The roadway no longer represented a simple location on his route. It had become a reminder that lasting public trust is built one thoughtful decision at a time, beginning not with assumptions, but with the willingness to observe, listen, and allow the facts to lead the way. Months later, the intersection had become just another ordinary part of the city, blending quietly into the daily lives of thousands of people who crossed it without giving a second thought to the careful planning hidden beneath the asphalt. Parents drove children to school, delivery trucks kept businesses supplied, cyclists moved safely through clearly marked lanes, and commuters reached work a little more efficiently than before. No one noticed the improvements because everything simply worked. That, Maya Brooks often reminded her colleagues, was the greatest compliment any transportation professional could receive. She had already moved on to another assignment in another state, reviewing bridges, intersections, and highway corridors with the same quiet discipline that had guided her throughout her career. Every inspection followed the same principle. Observe before concluding. Verify before deciding. Protect the public before protecting pride. Her work rarely appeared in newspapers, and she preferred it that way. Success was measured by safer roads, not public recognition. Back in Washington, Officer Brandon Hale continued serving the community, but his approach had changed in ways that even his fellow officers began to notice. During briefings, he listened more carefully before offering conclusions. During service calls, he asked additional questions before making decisions. He discovered that slowing down for a few extra moments often produced better outcomes than relying on first impressions alone. Younger officers occasionally asked him why he seemed so patient during situations that appeared straightforward. Hale would simply smile and answer, "Every scene tells a story. Your job is to understand it before you decide how it ends." He never mentioned names. He never described the inspection in detail. The lesson itself mattered more than the event that had inspired it. One crisp autumn morning, Hale happened to drive through the same intersection once again. Morning sunlight reflected across the fresh lane markings, and traffic moved smoothly through the synchronized signals. A city maintenance crew was planting flowers near the sidewalk, while a crossing guard greeted students walking toward a nearby elementary school. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary, and well-organized. He parked briefly along the curb and stepped out, taking in the familiar view. The roadway no longer reminded him of paperwork or official reviews. It reminded him that every public servant, regardless of title or uniform, shares the same responsibility to protect the people who trust them. At that moment, his phone received a routine departmental bulletin recognizing several agencies for successful cooperation on transportation safety initiatives completed earlier that year. Among the listed teams was the Federal Transportation Office responsible for overseeing infrastructure compliance. Hale smiled quietly before returning the phone to his pocket. He knew exactly how much unseen effort stood behind those few lines of recognition. Somewhere hundreds of miles away, Maya was likely standing beside another roadway with another notebook, watching another ordinary scene that most people would never truly notice. The thought brought a sense of respect rather than surprise. Some people change the world by standing in front of cameras. Others change it by standing quietly beside a road, making certain that strangers they will never meet arrive home safely. As Hale returned to his patrol vehicle, he looked one final time at the intersection before continuing his route. The road stretched ahead beneath a clear blue sky, carrying thousands of stories that would never be told because careful preparation had prevented them from becoming tragedies. And perhaps that was the quiet truth hidden beneath every mile of pavement. Real public service is not remembered because people noticed it. It is remembered because they never had to.